"Apologize to my brother or get out of my house," my wife said at dinner. So I stood up, walked over to him, and said one sentence that ended 3 marriages, including my own. All right, Reddit. This happened back in October, and my friend Derek told me I should post it here because, according to him, my life has officially become a cautionary story about in-laws, toxic family relationships, and what happens when you finally stop tolerating disrespect after 6 years of being treated poorly. My wife demanded that I apologize to her brother in front of 14 people at a family dinner. Instead, I stood up, walked toward him while he sat there wearing that familiar smug smile, and said one sentence that brought the entire room to complete silence. Within 20 minutes, 3 marriages were over. Mine was one of them. This is a long story. Buckle up. My name is Nathan. I'm 38 years old, and I work as an aerospace engineer at a mid-sized company in California. Up until that Saturday night in October, I truly believed I had a decent marriage. It wasn't perfect, but it felt stable. Stable enough to plan a future. Stable enough to talk about having kids someday. Stable enough that I believed we'd grow old together. Clearly, I was wrong. My wife, Megan, and I had been together for 8 years total. Married for 6. We lived in a comfortable suburban home in Riverside. Nothing extravagant, but a good neighborhood, a 2-car garage, and a backyard big enough for a dog. We both had solid careers. No children yet, but we had started having serious conversations about that next step. I earned around $140,000 a year at my engineering firm. It was good, steady money, not flashy, but respectable work that I genuinely enjoyed. There's something fulfilling about knowing your work is literally orbiting the planet, helping people communicate across continents. My designs are up there. My calculations, the late nights, early mornings, and weekends spent running simulations. That work matters, even if no one at dinner parties wants to hear about satellite communication systems. Megan worked in marketing for a small agency downtown, earning about $75,000 a year. Together, we were doing better than most couples our age. We had savings, investments, and we traveled to places like Hawaii and Costa Rica. From the outside, our life probably looked well put together, but anyone who's been married knows that appearances rarely reflect reality. And in our case, the issue had a name: Garrett. Megan's older brother, Garrett, was 42, tall, polished, and the kind of guy whose looks made people assume success before he even spoke. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, confident handshake. The type who walks into a room and immediately scans for the most important person to talk to. He ran a real estate development company that had been handed to him by his father-in-law. Garrett liked to present himself as self-made, always talking about his vision, drive, and entrepreneurial mindset. But anyone who knew the truth understood he married into money and opportunity. His wife, Elena, came from old wealth, country club memberships passed down for generations, vacation homes and places most people only see online. From the very beginning of my relationship with Megan, Garrett made it clear he didn't think I was good enough for a sister. At first, it was subtle, small comments, backhanded remarks. Aerospace engineering, that's steady, I guess. Megan, are you sure you don't want someone with more ambition? Must be nice having a government-adjacent job where you just clock in and clock out. Some of us actually build things. Always said with a smile, always followed by, "Just kidding, man," once he saw my reaction shift. But over time, the comments became sharper, more direct, and more public. And Megan never defended me. She laughed it off. "That's just Garrett being Garrett," she'd say. "He doesn't mean anything by it." Except he didn't treat everyone that way. He didn't talk like that to Kyle, Amanda's husband, who'd made partner at his law firm. He didn't do it to the cousins in finance or medicine. It was just me, the aerospace engineer who worked on complex systems instead of moving money around and calling it innovation. I should have recognized the warning signs years earlier, but I loved Megan, or at least I thought I did. so I stayed quiet. I kept my head down. I kept attending family events where I knew I'd be disrespected. The dinner that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration. Megan's parents, Richard and Patricia, were renewing their wives after 40 years of marriage, 40 years of partnership and commitment. They wanted to mark it with a big family dinner at their house. Catered food, decorations, the full effort. Everyone was there. Garrett and Elena, Megan's younger sister, Amanda, and her husband, Kyle, an aunt and uncle from San Diego, a few cousins, 14 people total, all dressed nicely, all pretending to be one big happy family. I knew it would be a difficult night when Garrett arrived in his brand new Tesla and immediately announced he'd paid cash for it. Couldn't even fit all the cash in one briefcase, had to use 2 bags, but when you close a deal like I just did, you treat yourself. He looked directly at me when he said, "You know how it is." I smiled and nodded. Same routine as always. Don't react, don't cause tension, keep the peace. 6 years of keeping the peace had led me to a table where I was being openly humiliated while my wife stared at her plate like it held hidden answers. Dinner began nicely. Patricia had decorated beautifully. White roses, candles, soft music. Richard gave a heartfelt speech about marriage, commitment, and choosing each other on hard days. We raised our glasses. It was genuinely moving. For about 20 minutes, everything was fine. Then the main course arrived, and Garrett's need for attention. "So, Nathan," he said loudly, cutting into his fillet like a performance, "still working on those, what do you call 'em, rocket parts?" "Satellite components," I corrected calmly, "for communication satellites." Right, he said dismissively. "Sounds thrilling. How's the pay these days? Still low 6 figures?" The table fell silent. "I do fine," I said. "Fine," Garrett repeated, letting the word linger. "That's my point, Megan. Don't you want more than fine? Don't you want exceptional?" Megan shifted but said nothing. Elena quietly asked him to stop, reminding him it was his parents' celebration. But Garrett continued, listing everything he provided for his wife, the house, the cars, the vacations. That's what a man should give his wife. "Different people value different things," I said evenly. "Some people value ambition, or in your case, the lack of it." Richard finally spoke. "That's enough." But Garrett pressed on, calling my career middling. That word landed hard. I thought about everything I'd worked for, years of school, patents, projects that had real-world impact, work that mattered. Something inside me finally snapped. "You know what, Garrett?" I said, setting my fork down. "I think you've made yourself very clear." He leaned back, enjoying the attention. He continued talking. Megan weakly told him to stop, but she looked at me, not him. That's when I understood. I'd already lost her. I stood up. "Actually, Garrett," I said, "there's something everyone here should know." The room went silent. I walked slowly around the table toward him.
Everyone's eyes followed me. "The reason you've been able to close all those major development deals," I said, stopping beside his chair and looking down at him, "is because your father-in-law has been directing money from his pension fund investments into your projects. I know this because I manage aerospace contracts connected to the same pension fund. I've seen the records. I've seen the shell companies. I've seen where the money actually ends up." Garrett's face drained of color instantly, as if all the blood had vanished. Elena's glass slipped from her hand and struck the table, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth. "That's a lie," Garrett said, but his voice cracked on the word. He sounded frightened, not like the confident businessman he always portrayed. "It isn't," I replied calmly. "Your company looks profitable on paper only because you're receiving loans at rates that don't exist in the real market. Those loans are backed by pension fund money meant to be safely invested for retirees, not used to support your real estate projects. I've been documenting this for months, deciding whether to report it or talk to Megan first. You just made that choice easy for me." Richard stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. "Is this true? Garrett, is what he's saying true?" Elena stared at her husband in shock. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me my father isn't involved. Tell me right now." "Who cares how the money comes in?" Garrett said, his composure fully collapsing. "The project succeed, everyone gets paid, it's just creative financing. Business people do this all the time." "Except the retirees," I said, "who are counting on that pension fund for their future. Except the teachers, firefighters, and nurses who trusted their savings would be protected. Instead, it's paying for your Tesla and your house in the hills." Megan grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Nathan, what are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago," I said, looking at her directly, truly seeing her for the first time in years. "I'm telling the truth. Your brother has spent 6 years calling me a failure, mocking my career, and tearing me down. And all this time, he's been committing fraud, while you stood by and let it happen." The dinner fell apart immediately after that. Elena began shouting at Garrett, demanding to know how deep the deception went. Was everything built on lies? Richard stepped into the hallway, already on his phone, his face gray with shock. Patricia sat at the head of the table, crying quietly as the celebration she had planned so carefully unraveled around her. The candles were still lit, the flowers were untouched, none of it mattered anymore. Amanda and Kyle tried to calm everyone while clearly struggling themselves. Kyle met my eyes and gave a small, almost unnoticeable nod. I saw it. Elena stared at me as if I were a stranger. "You humiliated my family," she said, her voice shaking. "Your brother humiliated me for years, at every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering. You let it happen. All of you did." "That's not the same thing," Megan said. "He was joking. He didn't mean it. You just destroyed his marriage, his reputation, everything he's worked for." "Everything he's worked for?" I said. "He's never worked for any of it. He married money and then stole more. That's not work. That's a crime." I looked at my wife and finally accepted what I'd been avoiding for 6 years. She wasn't angry because her brother was a fraud. She was angry because I exposed it. To her, protecting the family image mattered more than my dignity, more than the truth, more than the people whose retirement savings were being stolen. "Apologize to Garrett," she said, her voice rising. "Apologize right now." "They aren't accusations, they're documented facts, and I'm not apologizing for telling the truth." "Then leave," Megan said sharply. "If you won't apologize, get out of my house." The room went silent again. Everyone froze. "Your house?" I asked quietly. "The house we bought together? The house I've paid most of the mortgage for 6 years?" "Our house," she corrected, "and I'm telling you to leave." I looked around the table one last time. At Garrett, pale and shaking, at Elena, mascara streaked down her face, at Richard in the hallway, at Patricia crying, at a family that chose appearances over integrity, and at my wife, who was still choosing her brother over her husband. "I'll pack my things tomorrow," I said calmly. "You can keep the house. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce." Her face went white. "Divorce? Nathan, wait, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You just didn't think I'd actually leave. You expected me to apologize, to give in like always. I'm done doing that." I walked out and didn't look back. I drove to a downtown hotel, checked into a room, and sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at the wall. Not thinking, not feeling, just existing. 8 years ended in 20 minutes, not because of betrayal or infidelity, but because I finally refused to accept disrespect. The next morning, I returned to the house, while Megan was staying with her parents. I packed my clothes, gathered my personal belongings, and took my important documents. Everything else stayed. The furniture, decorations, photos, things tied to a life that no longer felt real. That week, I rented a small apartment across town. Plain, functional, no emotional investment, just a place to sleep, eat, and figure out what came next. It was exactly what I needed. The quiet took some getting used to. No criticism, no passive remarks, no dismissive comments about my work, just silence, and for the first time in years, space to breathe. The fallout from that dinner was significant. Within a week, Elena filed for divorce. The investigation revealed the situation was worse than I initially knew. Garrett hadn't just secured favorable loans, he'd been moving money through multiple shell companies, burying the trail under layers of paperwork. The investigation uncovered years of financial manipulation. His development company collapsed within a month. Projects were abandoned, investors scrambled. His father-in-law faced federal charges. The story spread from local news to national outlets. Garrett's mugshot showed a man very different from the confident image he'd spent years portraying. Then the unexpected call came. About 2 weeks after I moved out, Kyle called me. "Nathan, I need to tell you something. I've wanted to say it for years, but was afraid of what it would do to the family." "Like what's happening to me now?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Garrett has been doing this his whole life, manipulating people, exaggerating his success, tearing down anyone who didn't admire him. I've seen it for years, but every time I tried to say something, the family protected him." "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Because you're the first person who ever stood up to him, and I want you to know not everyone thought you were the problem. Some of us saw exactly what was happening."
We simply weren't brave enough to act. I should have spoken up years earlier. I regret that I didn't. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. It confirmed something I had felt but couldn't prove, that I wasn't imagining things. What Garrett had been doing to me for years wasn't normal. I wasn't being overly sensitive or blowing things out of proportion. Someone else had noticed it. Someone else had seen it clearly and had been too afraid to say anything. It wasn't only about Garrett. It was about an entire family system that had enabled his behavior for decades. They protected him, excused his actions, and attacked anyone who questioned him. Megan had grown up inside that system. From a young age, she learned that preserving the family image mattered more than honesty, more than accountability, more than doing the right thing. Some lessons are taught so early and so deeply that people don't even realize they've learned them. The divorce took 4 months to finalize. Megan attempted to take everything: the house, the savings, my retirement accounts. Her attorney argued that I had destroyed her family and owed compensation for emotional distress. They even tried to claim that exposing her brother's crimes constituted emotional abuse, as if telling the truth about fraud were the same as mistreating a spouse. But I had a strong lawyer, one Kyle recommended, and more importantly, I had records. 6 years of mortgage payments showing I'd paid far more than half. Bank statements proving I covered most household expenses, while Megan spent her discretionary income on clothes and trips. Documentation showing she had invested thousands of dollars from our joint savings into her brother's company, without telling me. Money that disappeared when the business collapsed. When everything was presented in court, it became clear I had been carrying the financial burden of the marriage for years. While Megan and her family treated me like a convenient ATM, the final settlement was split evenly, which meant I walked away with more than half of what I'd originally contributed. The judge dismissed the emotional abuse argument entirely. I wasn't interested in winning. I just wanted it finished. I wanted to close that chapter and move on. The most unexpected moment came about 6 months later. I was grocery shopping on a Sunday afternoon, filling my cart with simple meals: chicken, vegetables, rice. I was inspecting avocados when I heard my name. Nathan. I turned and barely recognized Patricia, Megan's mother. She looked older, worn down, deeply tired. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly.
We stood in the produce aisle while shoppers moved around us, and she said something I never expected. "You were right about Garrett, about everything. Richard and I knew something was wrong for years. We just refused to face it. We raised him to believe rules didn't apply to him, that he deserved success simply because he existed, and we let that belief destroy him." "Why tell me this?" I asked. "Because you deserved better," she said, tears forming. "From all of us, but especially from Megan. She was so afraid of disappointing us that she forgot how to be your partner. She forgot that marriage means choosing your spouse, even when your family is wrong." "How is Megan?" I asked. "Alone," she replied. "She moved back in briefly, but it didn't work. She's in a small apartment now, working long hours, not dating. I think she's trying to figure out who she is without us directing her." I felt a brief sadness, not regret, just the weight of what could have been if things had been different. "I hope she figures it out," I said, and meant it. Before I left, Patricia stopped me. "I know it's too late, but I'm sorry for what Garrett did and for what we allowed. You deserved a family that stood up for you. We failed." I nodded and walked away. Garrett's trial began 2 months later. Federal prosecutors uncovered extensive fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy charges. Bail was denied. He remained in custody throughout the trial. If convicted, he faced 12 to 15 years in prison. He was found guilty on all counts. 14 years in federal prison, plus restitution for the rest of his life. The judge called it one of the most severe pension fraud cases she'd seen in 2 decades. His father-in-law cooperated with prosecutors, took a plea deal, and received 5 years in federal prison. Assets were seized, country club memberships revoked, generational wealth erased in months. Elena filed for divorce immediately, took the kids, moved to Colorado, and returned to her maiden name. Last I heard, she was working in real estate, legitimately this time. 3 months after the divorce, my boss called me into his office. I expected a project update. Instead, he offered me a promotion, senior systems engineer, 15% raise, a team of 4, lead role on a major defense contract. "What changed?" I asked. "You did," he said. "You're more confident. You push back when needed. Whatever happened personally made you better professionally." My salary increased to $162,000. Not flashy money, but earned money. 8 months after the divorce, I was at an Italian restaurant with Claire, who I'd been dating for 3 months. Megan walked in, saw me, froze, and left without saying a word. Claire watched it happen. "Ex-wife?" she asked. "Yeah." "She looks miserable." "Yeah." Claire took my hand. "Good." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in a long while. Kyle called again a month later. He and Amanda had separated. She blamed me, blamed Kyle, blamed everyone except Garrett. She believed everything would have returned to normal if I'd stayed quiet. Kyle admitted carrying the family's secrets for years was exhausting. She knows the truth, she just can't accept it. Garrett's sentencing aired on the news. The man who mocked my career now stood in an orange jumpsuit. Claire raised her glass. To karma. Richard called the next day. He apologized. He said I'd been right. Before hanging up, he said, "You were the best thing that ever happened to my daughter. She just couldn't see it." Claire moved in 3 weeks later. We found a modest 2-bedroom apartment with room for her books and my work equipment. She cares about what I do. She listens. She asks questions. She helped me solve a design problem once, sketched an idea that ended up close to the final solution. You put things into space that help people communicate. That matters. Garrett built a prison sentence. So, here we are. Garrett is in federal prison. Megan is alone. The family is fractured. And I'm finally at peace. My work is still orbiting Earth, still doing something meaningful. Last week, I got an email from an old professor. A former student of mine is interning at my company. She said a talk I gave at her high school inspired her to become an engineer. I don't even remember the talk. Funny how that works. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel bring you more stories like this. Thanks for watching.